50 meters. That was the difference between life and death for 312 people that day. 50 meters that separated our Airbus A330 from a tragedy that would have made worldwide headlines for weeks. 50 meters between a miracle and a catastrophe that would have forever changed the lives of hundreds of families. I'm Captain Robert Mitchell, but everyone calls me Bob. I'm 52 years old, and after 28 years flying the skies around the world, this is without a doubt the most intense story I've ever lived in aviation. You know how it feels to wake up on a Tuesday thinking it'll be just another normal work day? That's exactly how that October 23rd started. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. in my apartment in New York, had my usual coffee, always black, no sugar, and took a look at the weather for the JFK-Lisbon route. Clear skies, favorable winds, no turbulence forecast. It looked like it was going to be one of my most peaceful flights of the season. Arriving at JFK at 11:30 a.m., I met my crew already gathered in the briefing room. My co-pilot was Captain Sarah Thompson, one of the most competent pilots I've known in nearly 3 decades of career. A graduate of the Air Force Academy, Sarah had 15 years of experience in commercial aviation and over 8,000 flight hours. We'd been working together for almost 2 years, and I knew I could trust her completely in any situation. "Good morning, Captain," said Sarah as we reviewed the flight plan together. "Everything's set for Lisbon today. Takeoff weight within limits, standard oceanic route, estimated flight time 8 hours and 35 minutes. Our aircraft was an Airbus A330-200, tail number N847AA, with only 6 years since manufacture and an impeccable maintenance record. A magnificent machine, equipped with the most modern navigation and safety systems. I never imagined that, just 3 hours after takeoff, I'd be manually piloting those 230,000 kilos of metal in one of the most critical situations in modern commercial aviation. During the pre-flight inspection, everything was perfect. The 3 hydraulic systems, green, blue, and yellow, operating normally. Backup systems functioning. Full fuel for the transatlantic crossing. Neither Sarah nor I could imagine that an event with a probability of 1 in 10 million was about to transform our routine into a technical nightmare. Our cabin crew consisted of 10 experienced flight attendants, led by lead flight attendant Michael Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with the company. During the safety briefing, we reviewed all emergency procedures, not knowing that in a few hours we'd be putting that knowledge to the test in the most dramatic way possible. At 2:20 p.m. Eastern Time, our A330 rolled down runway 31L at JFK with 312 souls on board. The takeoff was smooth as silk, that magical moment when 230 tons of metal defy gravity and gracefully rise to the skies. We established our initial climb heading to FL 370, 37,000 feet altitude, our cruise altitude for the Atlantic crossing. JFK Tower, American 1054 established en route, thanks for the service, I transmitted as we switched to oceanic control frequency. Everything absolutely normal. Sarah adjusted the navigation systems to automatic mode, and we began our transatlantic cruise routine. We were talking about our families. Sarah had recently gotten married and was planning her honeymoon in Portugal after a few days off, while I told her about my son, who had just graduated with a degree in aeronautical engineering. "Who knows, maybe someday he'll fly with us," I joked, not imagining that in the next few hours I'd live an experience that would completely redefine my perspective on human limits in aviation. It was exactly 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time when our lives changed forever. We were approximately 400 nautical miles off the US coast, flying stable at FL 370, when we heard that sound that haunts any pilot's nightmares. A muffled, deep thud, as if something vital had broken in the heart of the aircraft. The plane shuddered. It wasn't common turbulence. It was a strange, unpleasant vibration that ran through the entire structure like a shiver of pain. At the same instant, like soldiers marching to war, 3 red lights lit up simultaneously on the ECAM panel. Hydraulic 1 fault, hydraulic 2 fault, hydraulic 3 fault. For a split second, and I swear they were the longest seconds of my life, Sarah and I looked at each other in silence. It couldn't be possible. In 28 years of career, I had trained this situation hundreds of times in the most advanced simulators in the world, but never had I faced a simultaneous failure of all three hydraulic systems in real flight. "Sarah, are you confirming the reading?" I asked, though I knew she was seeing exactly what I was seeing. My voice came out calmer than I felt inside, the result of decades of training that automates certain reactions, even in the worst scenarios. "Affirmative, Captain. 3 hydraulic systems inoperative. I'm going to initiate emergency checklists immediately. For those who aren't in aviation, let me explain what this means in practice. An Airbus A330's hydraulic system is like the human body's circulatory system. It feeds practically all the aircraft's vital functions. The flaps that reduce our landing speed? Hydraulic. The brakes that make us stop on the runway? Hydraulic. The spoilers that destroy lift after landing? Hydraulic. The rudder? Hydraulic backup. Even some of the flight controls depend on these systems. And now at 37,000 feet over the Atlantic, with 312 lives under my responsibility, all 3 systems were dead. The ECAM, our electronic monitoring system, began presenting a cascade of secondary warnings. It was like watching electronic dominoes fall. Every system that depended on hydraulics began presenting failures or operational limitations. The cockpit, which moments before was bathed in the soft blue light of normal instruments, now blinked like a sinister Christmas tree. "Bob," said Sarah, while her hands flew through the pages of the QRH, our quick reference handbook. "According to the checklist, we're going to have to execute a landing with no flaps and no brake assistance. Approach speed is going to be minimum 180 knots, possibly more depending on our weight at landing." 180 knots. Let me translate that for you. That's approximately 205 miles per hour. For comparison, a normal A330 landing happens at about 150 knots, with all flaps extended and systems functioning perfectly. We were talking about landing 30 knots faster, which might not seem like much, but in aviation, it's the difference between total control and the absolute limit of physics. Even more serious, without hydraulic-assisted brakes, we'd depend solely on emergency brakes and engine reverse thrust to stop nearly 200 tons of metal moving at over 200 miles per hour. It was like trying to stop a freight train using only the parking brake. "Lisbon Control, American 1054, I transmitted on the radio, keeping my voice firm and professional. "We declare emergency pan, total hydraulic system failure. Request immediate vector to alternate airport with long runway and full emergency services." The Portuguese controller's response came almost instantaneously, but I could detect tension behind the professional voice. "American 1054, understand your emergency. We have Monte Real Air Base available, runway 06 with 1,800 meters, winds from 080 degrees at 5 knots. All emergency units are being activated. Confirm if you accept Monte Real as alternate. 1,800 meters. I felt my blood freeze in my veins. A 1,800-meter runway to land an A330 without adequate brakes at 180 knots speed was statistically impossible. The Airbus manuals are clear. Under normal conditions, we need at least 2,100 meters for a safe landing. In our current configuration, with elevated weight and no assistance systems, we'd be talking about needs close to 2,500 meters. But we had no choice. Lisbon was temporarily closed due to dense fog, Porto had construction on the main runway, and Madrid was beyond our reach with available fuel. Considering we'd need to burn fuel before landing to reduce weight. "Lisbon Control, American 1054 accepts Monte Real as alternate. Please coordinate with Airbase for immediate military traffic clearance and full emergency positioning." While changing our route to Monte Real, Sarah and I began the most complex and critical preparations of our careers. The emergency checklist for total hydraulic failure has 47 mandatory items, each one potentially meaning the difference between success and catastrophe. "Sarah, I'm going to need you to monitor our speed like a hawk," I said, while taking manual control of the aircraft. The A330 responded strangely, without hydraulic assistance in the secondary flight controls. It was like driving a high-performance sports car after someone disconnected the power steering. Technically possible, but requiring physical strength and millimetric precision. "Captain," she said after several minutes of intense calculations, "with our current weight of approximately 185 tons, optimal approach speed will be 183 knots. Estimated stopping distance 2,200 meters, assuming maximum engine reverse and emergency brakes functioning perfectly. 2,200 meters. We needed 2,200 meters, but we only had 1,800. A deficit of 400 meters, more than 3 football fields difference between a safe operation and catastrophe. At that moment, I made one of the riskiest decisions of my career. Sarah, we're going to do fuel dumping. We need to reduce our weight to decrease stopping distance. Fuel dumping, discharging fuel in flight, is an operation rarely executed, usually reserved for the most serious emergencies. It literally meant throwing thousands of gallons of fuel into the ocean to reduce the aircraft's weight. It was risky because if something went wrong during approach and we needed a second attempt, we wouldn't have enough fuel to reach another airport. Lisbon Control. American 1054 requesting authorization for fuel dumping over ocean. We need to reduce operational weight for emergency landing. American 1054 authorized fuel dumping. Maintain altitude FL200 and report when complete. For the next 20 minutes, we dumped 18 tons of fuel into the Atlantic. It was painful to watch the fuel indicators decreasing rapidly, knowing each gallon represented our safety margin, but also our only chance to reduce the distance needed to stop at Monterreal. Meanwhile, Sarah coordinated with our cabin crew. Lead attendant Michael Rodriguez was informed of the situation, and they began discreetly preparing passengers for an emergency landing without causing panic. It's a delicate art, informing enough so people are prepared, but not so much that it causes collective hysteria. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced over the PA system, choosing each word with surgical care, "due to a technical issue with our systems, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Monterreal Air Base in Portugal. As a precaution, our cabin crew will brief you on special safety procedures. We ask that you remain calm and follow all crew instructions." I didn't mention that we were about to attempt something that defied all known probabilities in commercial aviation. I didn't talk about the 400 meters we were missing on the runway. I didn't say that the next 30 minutes would determine whether 312 people would go home or become another tragic aviation statistic. Behind the flight deck, I could hear the coordinated movement of the crew preparing the cabin for emergency landing. Impact position demonstrations, emergency equipment checks, preparation of emergency exits. It was like watching a silent symphony where each movement could save lives. Sarah continued our calculations while I kept the aircraft stable in our descent toward Monterreal. "Bob, with weight reduced to 167 tons, our approach speed can decrease to 178 knots, and estimated stopping distance drops to 1,950 meters. 1,950 meters. That was still 150 meters beyond what we had available, but it was progress. It was the difference between impossible and extremely difficult. "I'm going to try to touch down at the runway threshold with absolute precision," I said. "Any meter beyond the threshold could be fatal. We need a surgical landing, Sarah." By surgical landing, I mean something that goes beyond normal technique. It meant placing the main wheels exactly where the runway began, without floating, without margin for error. Under normal conditions, it's acceptable to touch down up to 1,000 feet after the threshold. That day, we couldn't waste even 100 feet. Lisbon Control Center passed us to Monterreal Tower frequency. The military controller's voice was professional, but I could detect the tension. American 1054, Monterreal Tower. Runway 06 cleared. Wind from 090 degrees at 3 knots, QNH 1015. All emergency units positioned along the runway. Fire department, EMS, and rescue teams on maximum alert. I could see through the side window, the red and blue lights of emergency units forming a corridor along Monterreal's runway. It looked like a Hollywood action movie, but the consequences were all too real. 312 lives depending on my ability to put a 167-ton plane in a space smaller than necessary. "Sarah, I'm going to need you to be my extra eyes during approach," I said, while configuring instruments for the ILS approach to runway 06. "Monitor speed, altitude, descent rate. If anything goes out of parameters, tell me immediately." The ILS approach, Instrument Landing System, is normally one of aviation's most precise and safe operations. The radio system guides the aircraft in a virtual 3-degree corridor to the runway. But without flaps, our approach would be much steeper and faster than normal. At 2,000 feet altitude, we established visual contact with Monte Real. The airbase spread before us like a green-gray carpet, with runway 06 cutting through the landscape, like a perfectly straight black scar. I could see the numbers 06 painted in white at the runway beginning, our target of absolute precision. 1,500 feet, speed 185 knots, slightly high, but within parameters, Sarah reported. I began reducing power gradually. Without flaps to create extra drag, I depended solely on the fuselage's natural resistance and precise power adjustments to control our approach speed. It was like trying to tune a violin while running a marathon. 1,000 feet final configuration, I announced. Sarah, final checks. She quickly ran through our final list. Landing gear down and locked, tire pressure normal, backup systems active, engine reverse armed, emergency brakes tested and functional. At 800 feet, I could clearly see the fire units positioned along the runway. There were at least 15 vehicles. Foam trucks, ambulances, command cars, even a medical helicopter hovering at safe distance. It was comforting and terrifying at the same time to know so many people were prepared for the worst possible scenario. 600 feet, speed 182 knots, Sarah continued. Parameters good. The A330 flew differently without flaps. More stiff, less responsive to subtle commands. Each movement of the yoke had to be deliberate and precise. It was like the difference between dancing waltz and dancing tango. Both are dancing, but the technique and rhythm are completely different. 400 feet, speed 180 knots, we're on profile, Bob. I could see runway 06's threshold growing rapidly through the windshield. The numbers 06 painted in white became increasingly defined. That was my target. I had to put the main wheels exactly there, with no margin for error. 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet. At that point, each second lasted an eternity. I could feel sweat running down my face, but my hands remained steady on the yoke. Sarah continued the call-outs with a firm voice, being my extra eyes while I concentrated on the most critical approach of my life. 50 feet above the runway, I initiated the flare, that delicate and crucial movement where we slightly raised the aircraft's nose to soften the touchdown. With our weight and speed, I had only a window of a few seconds to execute the perfect maneuver. 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. I could see the runway threshold markings passing beneath us. It was now or never. The touchdown was firmer than any landing I had executed in 28 years of career, but it was within the aircraft's structural limits. The main wheels touched the asphalt exactly 150 feet from the threshold, a precision I couldn't believe I had achieved. I immediately cut engine power to idle and activated maximum reverse. The roar of the JT9D engines working in reverse filled the flight deck like the sound of furious dragons. Simultaneously, I began applying maximum pressure on the emergency brakes, using all the strength in my legs. Sarah quickly extended the spoilers manually, those surfaces that rise from the wings to brake lift and force the plane to stick to the ground. Without hydraulic system, she had to use physical force to pull the backup levers. We could feel the A330 fighting against the laws of physics to reduce its speed. The wheels screamed against the heated asphalt, leaving black marks on the runway. The smell of burning rubber began to seep into the cabin. Through the side windows, we saw the runway passing at still terrifying speed. 1,600 feet traveled. Our speed was still at 120 knots. 3,200 feet, 100 knots, and decreasing, but not fast enough. 4,000 feet, 80 knots. The end of the runway began to look dangerously close. "We're going to make it," shouted Sarah. And for the first time in 2 hours, I heard pure emotion in her controlled voice. 4,900 feet, 60 knots. I finally felt we were winning the battle against momentum. 5,200 feet, 40 knots. The emergency units began following us along the runway. 5,700 feet, 20 knots. The end of the runway was approaching, but I could finally feel we had control of the situation. With exactly 160 feet remaining of Monte Real's runway 06, Our Airbus A330, weighing 167 tons, finally stopped completely. 160 feet. The difference between an aviation miracle and a tragedy that would have made worldwide headlines. The silence in the flight deck lasted exactly 5 seconds, the time my brain needed to process that we had achieved the impossible. Then, like a powerful wave, the sound of intense applause began coming from the passenger cabin. 312 people celebrating the fact that they were still alive. Sarah and I looked at each other, and only then did I realize that my shirt was completely soaked with sweat. My hands were shaking slightly, and my heart was beating as if I had run a marathon. But we were all alive. All 312. Monte Real Tower, American 1054 on ground safely, I transmitted, and my voice failed slightly on the last words. It was the most emotional transmission I had ever made in my career. American 1054, welcome to Monte Real. Excellent work, crew. All units are approaching for routine inspection. In the following minutes, while emergency teams surrounded our aircraft for safety inspections, Sarah and I began the most complex post-landing procedures of our lives. We had to ensure all remaining systems were shut down safely, that there were no fire risks, and coordinate the controlled evacuation of passengers. Michael Rodriguez, our lead flight attendant, appeared at the cockpit door with shining eyes. Captain, Sarah, I have no words. The passengers want to meet you personally. During the evacuation, which was done via conventional stairs since there was no immediate risk, dozens of passengers stopped to thank us personally. I saw executives crying, entire families hugging, people calling home to say they were alive. It was a scene I'll never forget. An elderly lady with grey hair who must have been about 70 years old took my hand firmly and said, "Captain, you gave me a few more years with my grandchildren. I'll never forget this." I confess that at that moment, my eyes filled with tears. The subsequent investigation revealed impressive details about our emergency. A multiple bird strike, collision with a flock of migrating birds, had simultaneously hit all 3 main hydraulic lines during our initial climb over the ocean. The statistical probability of this happening is approximately 1 in 10 million flights. The Airbus technicians who came from Toulouse to examine our aircraft were impressed. "In 40 years of building airplanes," said the chief engineer, "I had never seen a simultaneous failure of all 3 systems like this, and I had never seen a landing executed with such precision under such adverse conditions." The commander of Monte Real Air Base, Colonel Antonio Silva, invited us for coffee the next day. "In 25 years of military career," he said, "I've seen many emergency landings. But what you guys did yesterday, that's going into the aviation history books." 3 days later, we were all on an American rescue flight bound for Lisbon, where many passengers finally completed their interrupted journeys. The flight was calm, but I noticed that many people looked at Sarah and me with a respect and gratitude I had never experienced. One thing became very clear to me after that day. Modern aviation is a complex symphony between cutting-edge technology and human capability. Our planes are incredibly sophisticated and safe machines, but in the end, when all systems fail, it's training, experience, and human decision-making that make the difference between life and death. If you're enjoying this story and want to know more real aviation accounts, subscribe to Black Box. We have dozens of exciting stories told by pilots who lived extraordinary situations in the skies. In the months following the Monte Real incident, I received hundreds of letters and messages from people around the world. Veteran pilots sharing their own experiences, aviation students asking for advice, and even family members of passengers thanking me for bringing their loved ones back home. One letter in particular marked me deeply. It was from a 12-year-old boy, son of one of the passengers, who wrote, "Captain Bob, because of you, my dad was able to teach me to ride a bike last Sunday. Thank you for giving me my dad back." This type of message made me understand that our profession goes far beyond simply transporting people from one place to another. We carry dreams, hopes, futures. We take a mother to see her son she hasn't seen in years, a businessman to close the deal of his life, young couples on their honeymoon, retirees fulfilling the dream of seeing Europe. And when something like the Monte Real incident happens, you realize the real weight of that responsibility. They're not just numbers on a passenger manifest, they're 312 life stories that depended on our competence, our training, and our ability to stay calm under extreme pressure. Today, whenever I conduct training for young pilots or speak at aviation events, I tell the story of the 50 meters of Montreal. Not to scare them, but to emphasize that our profession demands more than just technical knowledge of manuals and procedures. It demands the ability to make correct decisions when there's no time to consult manuals. It demands teamwork when every second counts. It demands staying calm when chaos reigns around you. And above all, it demands never giving up, while there's a chance, however small, to bring everyone home. What I learned in those 15 critical minutes over Portugal is that the difference between possible and impossible is sometimes a matter of inches. The difference between success and tragedy can be a decision made in fractions of a second. The difference between giving up and persisting can mean 312 lives. Sarah, who lived this experience by my side, always says that day completely changed her perspective on flying. You realize, she often says, that every normal landing is actually a small miracle of engineering and human skill working in perfect harmony. If you want to continue following real aviation stories like this one, subscribe to Black Box and turn on notifications. We have dozens of exciting accounts waiting for you. 6 months after the incident, American Airlines invited me to be chief instructor for emergency training. It was recognition that practical experience in extreme situations is something you don't learn just in simulators. I accepted the position with honor, knowing I could pass on to the next generation of pilots not just technical procedures, but also the mindset necessary to face the impossible. During these trainings, I always emphasize 3 fundamental principles I learned that day over the Atlantic. First, never underestimate the power of constant training. Those thousands of hours in simulators, those hundreds of memorized checklists, those procedures practiced until they became automatic, all of that became pure instinct when we needed it. When your systems fail and you have seconds to make decisions, it's training that speaks louder than panic. Second, teamwork is literally a matter of life or death. Sarah and I functioned as one mind during that emergency. There was no ego, no hierarchy beyond what was necessary for coordination. We were 2 professionals working with one goal: save 312 lives. That harmony only exists when there's mutual trust built over years of professional partnership. Third, never ever give up while your aircraft is still flying. Even when the numbers say it's impossible, even when statistics are against you, even when it seems there's no way out, there's always something that can be tried. Sometimes the difference between tragedy and miracle is simply refusing to accept impossible as a final answer. The Montreal incident also taught me about humility. No matter how experienced you are, no matter how many flight hours you have in your logbook, no matter how many systems you master, aviation can always surprise you. The ocean is full of stories of excellent pilots who underestimated a situation or trusted routine too much. Humility means always doing the complete safety briefing, even on the 1,000th flight of the same route. It means checking and rechecking systems, even when everything seems normal. It means never stopping studying and updating, because technology and procedures constantly evolve. But humility also means having confidence in your skills when the situation demands it. It's not a contradiction, it's balance. You need to respect aviation's complexity and risks, but you also need to trust your training and experience when critical moments arrive. Speaking of training, one thing that always surprises young pilots is discovering that situations like ours in Montreal are more common than they imagine. Not necessarily multiple hydraulic failures, but situations where you need to improvise, think outside the box, use resources unconventionally. I've seen pilots land with one engine, navigate with partially functional communication systems, deal with passengers in serious medical situations during transatlantic flights, face storms that weren't in the weather forecast, and hundreds of other situations where the manual offers general guidance, but the specific situation requires creative adaptation. Modern commercial aviation is incredibly safe, much safer than driving your car to work every day. But that safety doesn't happen by chance. It's the result of decades of evolution in technology, training, procedures, and mainly the safety culture that permeates the entire industry. Each incident like ours in Montreal generates detailed reports that are studied by engineers, pilots, and regulators around the world. The lessons learned become improvements in systems, updates in training manuals, new emergency procedures. It's a constant cycle of learning and improvement. What I'm most proud of about our profession is this culture of transparency and collective learning. When a pilot faces a critical situation and resolves it successfully, he doesn't keep the knowledge to himself. He shares it with the entire aviation community so others can benefit from the experience. That's why I'm here today, telling this story to you. It's not to glorify myself or seek recognition. It's to share lessons that can save lives in the future, to show that behind every commercial flight, there's a team of highly trained professionals committed to your safety. If you made it this far in this story, leave in the comments. What was the most challenging situation you've ever faced in your life? How did you manage to overcome it? Sometimes we discover we have more strength and capacity than we imagined, but only in moments of greatest pressure. Today, 4 years after the Montreal incident, I continue flying. I've made hundreds of flights since that day, most of them completely routine and without incidents. But every time I enter a flight deck, I carry with me the lessons from those 15 minutes over Portugal. I carry the responsibility of knowing that the people who board my plane are trusting their lives to my competence and dedication. I carry the pride of being part of a profession that connects the world, that allows families to reunite, that makes global business possible, that fulfills travel dreams. But mainly, I carry the memory that sometimes the difference between an ordinary day and an extraordinary day can be a matter of seconds, meters, or tenths of degrees. And when those moments come, it's our preparation, our calm, and our determination that make the difference. Those final 50 meters of Montreal's runway taught me that miracles don't happen by chance. They're the result of preparation meeting opportunity, of training meeting adversity, of experience meeting challenge. They're the result of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the situation demands it. And that's why every time I see a young pilot make his first solo flight, or when I attend the graduation of a new aviation school class, I remember I'm seeing the future of our profession. People who may one day face their own 50 meters of Montreal and will need all the competence, courage, and determination to bring everyone home. This is the essence of aviation. It's not machines that fly, it's dreams. It's not systems that save lives, it's people. And it's not procedures that create miracles. It's the human refusal to accept impossible as a final answer. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the skies. If this story touched you in some way, share it with someone who needs to know that even in the most impossible situations, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes an illuminated runway waiting for a perfect landing. Until our next meeting here on Black Box, keep dreaming high and never forget, the skies have no limits for those who prepare adequately to fly in them. This story is based on real events. All names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Special thanks to aviation professionals who share their experiences to make the skies safer.